Thank you for coming to our session. We're going to talk about the conference room connector. We're going to talk about how that's going to help you transition your standards-based rooms over to the Zoom ecosystem. I'm joined here today with Keith Blue from Groupon.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
And my name's John Boyd. I'm a sales engineer with Zoom. I actually live in Florida. We're dodging hurricanes right now. That's not real fun. But joined here by some of our customers from Florida too, so happy to see you guys. And so we're really excited to have you here. Keith's going to share some great information about some exciting things they're doing at Groupon. And first of all, how many of you guys are using the conference room connector today? All right, awesome. That's a good survey. So what we're going to do from an agenda perspective is we're going to go through an overview of the conference room connector. We're going to talk a little bit about the architecture of the conference room connector. We'll go through the customer journey and what we typically see in the field for those customers. We'll do a quick demonstration, and then Keith's going to share some of his valuable knowledge and some of the best practices that he's learned.
Cool. For right now, I think I'm just going to go over, sit there, and join the audience, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. I'm going to join you in just a second as well. All right. So we'd love for all of you to just deploy Zoom rooms in all of your conference spaces day one and provide the best experience for your users on the planet. We know that's not going to happen. It's not always practical to take hardware that you've invested in those rooms and switch over to Zoom rooms immediately. The typical technology life cycle that we see in those rooms is about 7 years. So, you're going to need some time to transition. Often those rooms also have some complex integration, and those things aren't going to happen overnight as well. So that's where the conference room connector comes into play and really gives you the ability to start leveraging those existing conference room investments day one as you transition to Zoom. So let's talk a little bit about how the conference connector works. So the conference connector acts as a gateway between your H.323 and SIP protocols and the native Zoom protocol. So it gives you the ability to connect into the Zoom conference from those conference rooms. You've also got the ability to bring in, picture a business-to-business connection over there. Maybe you have external legal counsel. They're using a Cisco room system, and it could be a Logitech system, a Polycom system, any system that speaks standard H.323 or SIP. You've got the ability to bring those external business-to-business partners into your meetings as well. Obviously, Zoom Rooms, Zoom Desktop, Zoom Mobile speak native Zoom protocol, providing some great experiences like wireless content sharing, proximity through AirPlay, virtual backgrounds on the mobile device. I don't know if you guys have played with that yet, but it's super cool. No green screen required on the mobile device, so very nice. So one element of the conference room connector is that ability to provide that gateway function. There's also additional services that we provide with the conference room connector that become really important for a lot of our customers. So provisioning, calendaring, device management, SIP registration, directory services, those are all elements that we're providing in our cloud for you so that you don't have to do that on premise. So you don't need to have a rack of servers with internal infrastructure. You don't have to have a team managing that. You don't have to pay the licenses, the maintenance, and all those other things that come with that. We're providing that in the cloud for you. One thing you'll notice on the bottom in the dark gray, that's your customer network. So to provide those services, we obviously need to talk to your endpoints that have private IP addresses. Our API connector is a little piece of software that you install on a server in your network, and it gives us that ability to have that communication. We've worked pretty diligently at Zoom to make sure that we're making our solutions as secure as possible and also reducing the hurdles for you guys in regards to things that you need to open as far as inbound connections, things of that nature. So you'll notice in this diagram, and apologize for that, I hit the wrong button. In the diagram, we've got outbound 443 connecting back to the Zoom cloud. We don't require any inbound connections there for that, which is awesome. All of these connections are outbound to Zoom. So you don't have to go to your security team, get inbound connections opened up. Those connections are all originating from your network, which makes that super easy. Another thing that we see is often customers will have, on-site infrastructure already for video. And between this path for signaling and data, you may have, a VCS Expressway. You might be using Polycom. You've got a DMA. You've got an RPAD. That path for firewall traversal can certainly be used day one to get those standards-based room systems into your Zoom meetings super easy without having to open any ports to Zoom. What we often see is customers will start that way, and then they'll transition from that on-premise infrastructure and start to open ports in their firewall, outbound ports to Zoom to allow that communication. So one thing to think about as you're looking at that transition is making sure your firewall has the proper capacity for the number of ports that you want to open and things of that nature. And just so you know, at the end of this session, we're going to try to leave about 10 minutes to 15 minutes for questions. We've got Keith, myself. We also have our product manager, Simon Booth, right here. And so we'll be able to answer any questions that you have. So keep those questions in your mind and be ready for that. One thing that the conference room connector brings that's really important to a lot of our customers is the ability to do one touch to join the meeting. How many of you today are doing one touch to join in your conference rooms? Awesome. That becomes really critical from a workflow perspective. If you already have one touch to join in your meetings, transitioning to Zoom becomes super easy. You point your rooms, you start managing those with the conference room connector. We enable the one touch to join capability, and your users walk in the conference room, they click one touch to join, and they're meeting on the Zoom ecosystem now instead of meeting on your on-premise infrastructure. Your users don't know anything really different happened other than they're getting a better experience. So that workflow is really important. If your users, if you don't have one touch to join enabled already, we're actually adding additional value in the conference room and simplicity for your users so that they can be able to walk in and just press that big green button to join the meeting. And that helps a lot in your transition over to Zoom. So let's talk about the customer journey real quick and what we typically see. So typically, customers start to use the conference room connector and they start to begin to leverage those existing investments. Then we see some consolidation in the fact that you start to retire some of that on-premise infrastructure and enhanced experiences in the conference room. So in your Cisco rooms, your Polycom rooms, your life-size rooms, you can go to Zoom, share.zoom.us. You can start sharing content wirelessly. You can start to do some interesting things with one touch to join and adding some features in those conference rooms. Then we start to see expansion with new features that Zoom brings to the conference room, like our scheduling displays. We'll talk a little bit about the controllers that we can actually, add controllers for your standards-based rooms. I'll show you some of that in the demo. And then digital signage is another value-add feature there. So scheduling displays can be used in your Zoom room. You can also use those in your standards-based room. Those displays are just talking to your calendaring system, so it doesn't matter that that's a standard room or a Zoom room. So that provides also some consistency between your rooms. And that becomes important because what we also see is customers start to roll out Zoom rooms and start to roll out video in other spaces where perhaps it was cost prohibitive before. And they start to be able to enable video in additional spaces, including open spaces and other spaces where maybe it wasn't so conducive before that. All right, so let's jump into a quick demo. We're going to do a quick demo here of about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we're going to turn it over to Keith. Keith has the most value in this whole session. Keith's done some amazing things at Groupon, so we want to leave him as much time as possible. So let's transition over. So what we're seeing here is this is our Zoom portal. And what you're seeing, there's a couple things that we're working on right now. You'll see under Room Management, we have Zoom Rooms, calendar integration for Zoom Rooms. Then we have the Cisco Polycom Rooms tab. We're working actively on consolidating those. So the Cisco Polycoms room tab will kind of go away. The calendar integration tab will be there, but it will be for Zoom rooms and Polycom rooms. The hierarchy that you see when you go into a Zoom room, that's going to be used based for your standards-based rooms as well. And that stuff is actively in motion right now, and Simon can certainly answer any questions about that near-term roadmap during the Q&A. So important parts of the hierarchy you guys have probably already seen in the Zoom room session, right? The other thing that's happening here, you can do things at the hierarchical level. So it might be at a city, it might be in a campus, it might be in a floor in a building. You've got all the ability to define that within the hierarchy. The alert settings are also coming over to your standards-based rooms, so you'll have the ability to define, which admins, maybe this is a conference room, maybe we're looking at the city of Denver. We want to know, hey, just the Denver admins need to get those alerts, and what exact alerts do they need to get? So that functionality is coming over to your standards-based rooms, which is awesome. So if we go take a look at the Cisco Polycom rooms and what's there today, there's some pretty nice things that we can do right now. So I'll take a look real quick. We'll pick on a couple of these rooms. I'll pick on the Cisco room, for instance. So I've got the ability here. I can go into the admin UI. First of all, I can see the status, obviously. I can go into the admin UI. We're doing a pass-through authentication there. So you'll notice I didn't have to put in a username or password. So here, if we go under maintenance and we take a look at the user interface, I want to see exactly what's going on in that room. I can click and take a look at exactly what's going on there. So super easy to get to those admin pages from the Zoom portal. If we take a look at one of our Polycom rooms, let me jump down here. Take a look at one of our Polycom rooms here. I'll pick on this group 300. There's a lot of things that we can do here in addition to seeing the status. Again, I'll jump into the admin UI, show you a couple things we can do there. So for instance, we talked about how Zoom is provisioning the endpoints. So if I do a quick search here and just go to provisioning, you'll see that this system's being provisioned by one of our interop servers. So our interop server is provisioning that standards-based endpoint. It's setting that endpoint with all the optimal settings to allow it to work in your Zoom meetings as best as possible. If we take a look at other services here, if we look at calendaring, you can also see that this endpoint is getting its calendaring information from one of our interop services. We're proxying that calendar information. And you can see those fields are grayed out. They're grayed out because it's being provisioned from the Zoom server. So we're taking care of making sure that system's set up optimally for you. And the last thing I'll show you here is something that we've been working on. I can obviously go see the screen, what's happening on the screen in the room. I can see the controller, exactly what's happening on that controller, on that Polycom system. A lot of nice things you can do here. We've also added the ability to have a controller in your Polycom Cisco rooms where it looks just like a Zoom room controller. So as you're rolling out Zoom rooms, if you want to have consistency between those rooms, you can have an iPad in the room providing the controller. It's going to give you that consistency. You may have some of your standard rooms where you have just an old clunky remote. You can put an iPad in there and start to provide that Zoom room looking interface for those rooms. I can click on a meeting. I can click start. I can join that meeting. All the things you would expect to be able to do there. All right. So now I'm going to turn it over to Keith. And Keith's got some great information to share with all of you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, before we get to that, just a little bit about myself by way of introduction. I'm curious, show of hands, who in here went to college, got a degree in managing video conferencing? No one? Okay, good. Me either. I actually came into video conferencing about 10 or 11 years ago by way of the help desk. I was managing a help desk organization at a company before I worked for Groupon, and they came to me because they knew I had a background in live event production. I'm usually the guy in the back of the room in that little booth. So this is a little weird for me up here, sort of like an out-of-body experience. But Anyway, they knew that I had some experience with that, so when they needed somebody to take over video conferencing, they thought, oh, this guy's used to like doing stuff with cameras and audio and all. Would you like to do this? And it was a little video network with about 20 endpoints in it. And I said, sure, why not? And then about 2 years later, the CIO came and voluntold me that I was going to take over all AV for the whole company worldwide. Which was pretty cool. But now I've been doing this for a number of years. Came to Groupon almost 2 years ago. And that kind of brings us to where I started. When I started with Groupon, we were not with Zoom yet. We were primarily inward focused with our video conferencing. So we had about 275 standards-based Cisco rooms, and all of the bridging and big metal infrastructure that runs behind that, staff of engineers to support it. And then we also had people running the client-based software from Cisco. And one of the frustrations that we had was we were port bound, because when you're bound to your physical hardware bridge, you can only use as many ports as you own. So as a result, we made some compromises in quality to go down to standard definition so we could get more ports out of each piece of hardware. And we were doing okay with that. And then we decided to start looking at other solutions. One of the big challenges we faced when we were looking for other solutions was because we were mainly inwardly focused, we had a separate tool that had to be used for external conferences. So now, in addition to the internal chat client that we were using, and then the internal video stuff, and now you've got the external video stuff, you spend the first 5 to 8 minutes of every meeting trying to figure out where are we meeting. So fast forward a little bit, and we deployed Zoom. And what did that look like? It was a lengthy POC, first of all. Because we really wanted to make sure that we had selected a product that was going to work for us. Groupon is a very video-forward company. Don't quote me on this, but when I started, they told me that the median age of the employees at Groupon is about 27 and a half years old. People, used to just picking up their phone and making a video call. Everybody meets via video. Not to mention the fact that we are globally distributed. We have teams. My team, for example, is 5 engineers, and we're in 3 different offices. So all of our meetings are via video.
So Keith, did you include international participants in that POC? How did you get the whole ecosystem of Groupon?
Yep, absolutely. We did sort of an alpha round, which was about 15 people internal to IT, just so we could kind of kick the tires and figure out how it worked. And then we really wanted our POC to include the entire breadth and depth of the organization. So we had people on every continent where we have an office. We had people at all levels of the organization, from vice presidents all the way down to administrative assistants. Even like the guy in the mailroom was part of the POC. And we did that deliberately, and I'll get into that in just a couple minutes when I talk about kind of what I would recommend as best practices based on my experience. One other thing I neglected to mention is that we had no link between our video infrastructure and scheduling before. So you mentioned that earlier, that if you're already doing scheduling with your conference rooms, it's an easy transition because you're already used to going in and pushing the big green button to join a meeting. We didn't have that. All of our meetings were ad hoc. So remember that for a moment, because that's another one of the big things we learned going into this. So anyway, the POC ran its course, and one of the really cool things about that, having feedback from throughout the organization, was those of us who live video conferencing, we make mental leaps that ordinary users don't when we walk into a video conference room, right? We kind of know what to expect. If something doesn't quite go right, we can pretty much figure our way through it. The ordinary person in finance doesn't make those same leaps. They want to call the help desk. So through the course of that POC, we were able to generate documentation to answer those questions so that on Go Live Day, which was, by the way, a day that we transitioned over, and on Go Live Day, about 85% of the questions that came into the help desk were able to be answered by sending somebody a link to a document that we had already published on our intranet. So recommendation number one, do a POC and use it well when you're rolling out any kind of new technology. And then the actual go live, as I mentioned, was one day. It was actually a weekend. So everybody went home on Friday night. They came in Monday morning, and we were a Zoom shop. And the way that worked practically was we communicated things out. We told people, okay, you've got 3 weeks to rebook all of your meetings starting on this date going forward. So go into your calendar. We launched the plugins and said, okay, go into your calendar, change your appointments. Here's how you do it. Set them all up as Zoom meetings starting on this Monday morning because this old way of doing things is going to be going away. We didn't actually take the old way away right away. That's a lot of ways. Anyway, we left the old infrastructure up for a period of time, for a sunset. And initially, we just sort of left it up as always. And then after we'd been live on Zoom for about a week, we put a welcome message on every one of our virtual meeting rooms. So anytime you met on our bridge, you get a little welcome banner across the bottom of the screen that said, hey, in case you missed all the emails, we've gone to Zoom, use this short URL to learn more. And that message would stay up for the first 30 seconds of the meeting, and then it would go away. And then a week later, we time limited all meetings on that bridge to 1 hour. And we changed the message to say, this meeting is limited to 1 hour. Go here for more information about our new tools. 2 weeks after that, we time limited the meetings down to 30 minutes, and the welcome message changed again, and it stayed up for the first minute of each call. And then finally, when it was time for it to go away, the final week, we said, this system will be gone as of this date, and that message just stayed up on the screen for their entire conference. What we saw was basically the usage on that system started to nosedive when we got to about the 2 week out, and they had a firm date of when it was going away. So that was It was kind of fun to watch that go down at the same time that our Zoom usage was starting to climb. So
Yeah, and that's pretty consistent with the customer journey that we generally see. Users walk into the conference room, you enable the one touch to join, they start joining the Zoom meetings, and the usage on that on-premise infrastructure just goes into the tank really quickly and really aids in that transition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned I would get back to this. One of the things that we were able to do to really encourage our population to start using the Zoom tools was that we had what we felt was a real value add to offer, which was, hey, if you schedule your meetings in Zoom, you get the big green button in the conference room. You don't have that if you're doing it the old way. So by offering that as a value add, we were really able to gain adoption very quickly, and it made the transition much easier for our users. So then before we get into the Q&A, and I think I'm just about on time here.
You're doing a great job.
So some key things that I learned from this rollout, and I'm sure others in here have had similar experiences. Whether we like it or not, being sort of on this side of the fence, anytime we make a change to the way people do things, change is a 4-letter word. It really is. And there's a sense of loss that comes with anything when you have to make a change to the way you've always done things. We certainly felt that from some of our user population. When we did this cutover, we had people coming to the help desk begging us, please, can I just use the old virtual meeting rooms? Do I have to use this new thing? And we were able to kind of talk them through that, and by providing the documentation up front and answering most of their questions before they were asked, we were able to sort of smooth that over a little bit. But that is a real thing to keep in mind when you get ready to do something like this, is that there really is a sense of loss to the average user that, well, to paraphrase, someone moved my cheese. I don't know what to do, even though you're doing the same thing you did yesterday, just using a different platform for the meeting. So that kind of comes to the adding value piece, because by adding value, you can negate that sense of loss a little bit. And then, using the proof of concept, using the ramp-up period wisely to figure out what are the questions that are going to be asked and be prepared to answer them before your wide population asks them is very important. And then the last thing, and it runs through everything that I just talked about, is I don't think it's possible to over-communicate when you're deploying a new technology like this. Keeping the information in front of the user population and making sure that they understand what are the changes that you're making and why are you making them is really key. If they understand what the benefit is, what's in it for me, then they'll be more likely to adopt the new technology that you're rolling out. So
I have a question for you. You started with, roughly about 275 Cisco rooms.
yes.
How many Zoom rooms have you rolled out so far?
So as of yesterday, we've rolled out 96 Zoom rooms. And this is in almost exactly 1 calendar year. So we've gone from about 275 standards-based rooms down to about 225 standards-based rooms. And at the same time, we've ramped up to nearly 100 Zoom rooms. So we have a net add of about 50 rooms worldwide. And we're starting to see that balance shift a little bit. We're actually redeploying some of the Cisco hardware that we already have because we already own it and it still works. But then where it makes sense, we're also deploying Zoom rooms because you can deploy a lot more Zoom rooms, for the same budget as deploying a handful of Cisco rooms. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Keith. We really, really appreciate your valuable
absolutely.
insight. And we'll open up for questions now.
I don't think we put anybody to sleep.
We do have a microphone in the middle. If you wouldn't mind, we could have the microphone brought to you, or if you could ask your questions there so everyone can hear them, that would be great. If you're close enough, just go ahead and ask away.
Simon's going to join us now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Simon.
Hi. We've got a similar story to you. We have predominantly Polycom group series in all of our rooms. I'm wondering, in terms of the connector and being able to manage the older Polycom group series rooms, how much can you actually do from within Zoom? And can you do the full provisioning and the management and administration updates? What's the extent of that? Because that would help us with our transition.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you want me to take that one? So Group Series is actually the current in market, so we don't consider that to be old. We also support HDX. We don't support anything older than HDX. And we don't support ISDN either. But Group Series, we basically do everything that we need to do for Zoom. Plus, if you also have other workflows like Skype for Business, we also support the management of those workflows. The only thing we don't do today is firmware updates, and that's something that we'll be doing in the next 3 to 6 months for Group Series. We do that today for some of the devices, but not for Group Series. Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Simon, all right. I got him on the stage. Here we go.
One of your fans.
That's it. Okay, so that was a lot of good information, by the way. Those questions were great. API connectors. Okay, I've got a few API connectors deployed. I want to go full Zoom. I want to get rid of all the VCS expressways and all that. What about redundancy for API connectors? Is there a solution for that?
There is. That's a good question. Before I answer your question, can I ask how many of you have worked with me and are API connector interop customers? Okay, great. Okay. Why aren't the rest of you? Okay, of the rest, okay, so, and I will get to your question. Great question. Of the rest of you, how many have Cisco, Polycom, or life-size equipment? Okay.
Most.
You're in the right session.
Yes, you're in exactly the right session, and by next year, you will all be raising your question. Your hands are the first one, because you'll see the value. API connector has had redundancy right from the start. So there's we do 2 scale-out options for API connector. And as John said, the API connector itself is a really simple, small app. It's kind of like a VPN client in that all it does is it just connects to the Zoom cloud, and then everything is in the Zoom cloud. The Zoom cloud itself is already highly redundant, and you can trust us to make sure that stays up. Right, Keith?
Yes. I didn't believe him when he first told me that it was that simple. So,
Yeah. And the API connector, when it's running, it runs on a Windows machine. So you have two choices. You can either use whatever virtualization technology you're using. So if you're running it on VMware, whatever, you can use VMware active technology just to spin up another one. They're configured identically. You can just clone it, and it will just spin up another one, and it will just work. So that's kind of one simple option. The other is you can just install another API connector on another instance, hopefully in a different data center or somewhere else, and it will also just work. And that will automatically be a redundant configuration. And you can have as many as you want. Don't know how many you have. Some customers have 2 or 3. I have one customer that has like 8. I'm not quite sure why they feel they need 8. I hope they're not here. But 8's too many. You don't need 8. Two is probably enough. For many of the devices also, if it does go down, if that API connector goes down, the impact on end users is usually pretty low, and it takes a while for it to become a problem. For Cisco endpoints, it's more immediate because we push calendar data to the endpoints, so it's kind of immediate, or within a few minutes. It keeps the green button that was on there does not go away, but it doesn't get updates. For a Polycom system, it's continually pulling the updates, and they come directly from the cloud. So it will continue to get its updated calendar. So.
Just one elaboration.
Yep.
So, but I know I have to set like the IF scope for which units are going to, endpoints are going to connect to which API connector.
Yep.
Let's say my main API connector were to fail, and I have one in another data center. Would that automatically take over, or would I have to reset that scope on the other API connector?
That's not what that's for. So there is an ability to have multiple API connector groups, if you like, and those can be targeted to service different groups of endpoints. And that's really intended for organizations where they either don't have a single LAN topology and that the network is not routable. So you can have branch offices that maybe have their own API connector servicing 20 endpoints over here, another one over there, servicing 20 endpoints over there, and they just happily work together. That's what that's for. It's not intended to be for the redundancy. And you can do both. So you can have 2 API connectors over here and 2 API connectors over there, and they're both working in redundant pairs on their own.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Oh, wow, there's a line.
Yeah, of course. Everybody knows you though, Simon. So I'm going to use the evil D word about documentation. So everybody talks to you, but it feels like there's not a lot of documentation on connector.
Yeah, let me introduce the...
So,
Now-
and between April and August 1st, you made probably 75 to 80 changes in connector,
Yes,
and almost none of them are documented?
yes. So
Okay. So
So-
I think you know my question.
yeah, so let me address that in a couple of ways. So firstly, we apologize. I apologize. We came to market very fast. We worked with customers like Keith who needed the functionality, and we had in our kind of pilot group over the last year and a half, we had about 20 to 30 customers that just went live with whatever we had and put up with the fact that we didn't have a lot of documentation. And the rest of you kind of got dragged along for the ride, and I apologize. What we have done is we've really grown that team significantly, and we've backfilled a lot of the documentation. The other reason why we haven't pushed the documentation, particularly on the admin side, is because John alluded, one of the things we've always wanted to do, we're now very close, is to merge in the management of the Zoom rooms with the management of the Cisco and Polycom rooms. So documenting the Cisco Polycom management as it currently stands didn't make a lot of sense, and we wanted to channel that engineering effort into building the product and then building that merged integration. So it's all excuses, and I can only apologize, and we're set to improve, and we've gained a lot of customer feedback, and
Yeah, and we are improving in small steps, as Simon mentioned. So for instance, if you go to our support page and you look at the firewall settings for the conference room connector, that now includes all of the interop servers. It includes, everything in one place where it necessarily wasn't before. So we are improving and definitely trying to go in the right direction.
Yeah, one more thing we've done about 4 months ago we started. We publish all updates to both the Conference Room Connector core, which is the SIP323 component, as well as the interop component servicing Cisco and Polycom. We now publish all of that to status.zoom.us. So if you go to status.zoom.us and subscribe to updates on status.zoom.us, you will receive advance notice, hopefully more than a week, but usually about a month we plan the feature releases. And that's really the place to go. So if you're not already subscribed to status.zoom.us, subscribe, because it'll have everything about Zoom on there. But we've now added the interop service as of a few months ago. So that's another key thing. But
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, and the release notes there are improving dramatically.
Yeah,
So,
and if you want more detail, it's obviously a compromise between how much detail we share, particularly if there are things to do with security and things that might be sensitive. Feel free to reach out to your SE or your customer support, your customer success manager, and ask for more information. We're very, very happy to give you as much detail as you want about what's up and coming in those releases.
Okay, that's great. Just a follow-on question. So I'm a Cisco customer. There's a slight delay. We have users who book as they get to the room, and they're complaining that they don't know how to get to the meeting because it hasn't popped up yet.
Yeah.
Is there any future improvements on that?
Yeah, we're making some incremental changes to that. So we're both making that process faster. Are you on O365 or Google? Exchange. So currently there's like a 2 to 5 minute delay of getting the data there. We are working to reduce that down to sub 30 seconds from the time the calendar booking is done, depending on Exchange propagation and whatnot. The other thing we're doing is adding an option for ad hoc using directory. So that's potentially going to help with that workflow of people needing to meet at once and call other rooms. Doesn't necessarily take away from that particular problem. But
Thanks for all your efforts. It's been great.
All right.
thank you.
Great
Thanks
question.
for the question.
Maybe somewhat unrelated to that, but I have a question about QoS settings on your internal network and any correlation with the DSCP markings within the Zoom portal.
Yes.
Yeah, so when you set those DSCP markings in the Zoom portal, we're using those for the Zoom client. For your standards-based room systems, you need to set QoS on those systems. So you need to go into your Polycom or your Cisco system, and you have to set your QoS there to match, the queuing that you're doing in your router.
But it's
Understood.
coming. So Trio, today, we do apply the QoS settings that are configured in the Cisco Polycom section. And once we do that merge with the Zoom Room management, that will also take the DSCP, the QoS markings that have been configured for desktop and other purposes, and will also propagate those down to the devices.
I guess my question is, are the markings retained? I mean, you're dialing out to the Zoom cloud and then back into your internal infrastructure, and there's been some questions of
Yeah,
in
so-
my internal network.
So
team about
those markings are going to help with your queuing getting out, your internet egress. Obviously, over the internet, there's no QoS, so that
Right.
QoS is not going to be maintained. The other thing you can do to help, even on your internet ingress, is you can mark certain ports coming back in and prioritize those. For instance, for a Zoom client, you can mark 8801, which that's where all your media is coming in, and you can kind of prioritize that on the Zoom client side. On the standards-based room side, it's a little harder because it's a much broader range of port on that ingress.
that. Okay.
You can also use the IP ranges. So we do publish the IP ranges, source IP, and do QoS based on that as well.
Awesome.
that's
Completely
great point.
unrelated, you were showing the iPad emulation of the Zoom Room interface, and I know I've worked with Simon about trying to test that out. Where do we stand date-wise with that release now?
Yeah, so we have 2 phases of that feature. Phase 1 of that feature is basically what John kind of clicked on and showed you. It's an HTML-based app. It can be deployed on an iPad as well. And we have an enterprise MDM deployable wrapper for it. That phase is available now. It's limited availability, which means it's in production. if you want it, either to try out or to deploy, talk to us. Talk to your SE, talk to your CSM, and we will help you decide if it's a good idea or not. There are certain criteria about whether we think that's going to give you a better experience or a worse experience than what your customers have. We'll help you just go through the pros and cons. The second phase of that will be a full native Android and iOS app. It will also include things like the proximity share for simplified content workflows and all of those other things. That's going to be sometime in 2019, hopefully middle of the year.
So currently, the standalone controller app within the API is how we get the first version of this?
Yes. What you see is what you get. But it is available and it is in production. So
Awesome.
you're not going to see it advertised, and the documentation is a little light. That's because it's limited availability.
I didn't see anything. Thank you.
I think they're recording this and streaming it. Oops.
Hey, thanks for your insights today. As an AV integrator, working with customers like you on the proof of concept process can be challenging just because of the time required versus like limited budget or appetite for spending at that point. Did you use an integrator during that process? And whether or not, do you have any advice for us about how to add value during that process?
Yeah, when we were working through the POC, that was basically a software thing. As a matter of fact, initially, when we signed on with Zoom, I believe our license was only for 10 Zoom rooms, and we added those in just as we might want to do this somewhere down the road. We were purely looking at that time, we were purely looking at a solution for the desktop, mobile, and something that would work with our existing conference rooms. And then the rest of it's all come, since then. So I don't know what I can offer you as far as, advice on that, because we really didn't do anything with any integrators until, much later down the road when we started, widely deploying Zoom rooms.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Is there a plan to have a dashboard for Cisco and Polycom Room as we have for Zoom rooms?
Yes. Yes, there is. So in addition to the merging of the admin, there'll also be all of the stuff that you currently get in Dashboard for Zoom Rooms. There'll be a similar set of functionality. You already get quite a rich set of detail from a meeting perspective. So obviously the conference room connector rooms show up, and you can drill down and you can get all of the QoS and jitter and all of those kind of detailed things from Dashboard today. But we will be adding some of the things that Zoom Room can do, and we're also looking at competitive platforms to see what's missing in terms of things like call detail records and stuff that you might need.
And any tentative date for that one to be there?
Hopefully early 2019. So yeah,
Thank you.
next few months.
Looks like we
It's
have time
next.
for one more.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect, yes.
All right. Unfortunately, I got a couple questions. On the DSCP marketing that you asked about, or we talked about earlier, a lot of our clients, our customers, they don't have admin rights to their PCs. So the documentation says you have to have admin rights in order to run custom DSCP markings like we have.
So what you have to do, it varies a little bit. So if you're on a Windows platform, you don't have admin rights. Those settings have to be set via a package you're going to push out. So those are install package options. And when that package gets sent out, it obviously has admin rights to your computer, and it can set those.
Okay, so the
markings.
MSI package has to have the admin rights in it.
Correct. You need to send that out as a package, and in the Zoom client package, you're going to set the options to set those markings.
Okay.
Now, on a Mac, just to complicate things a little bit, on a Mac, that's not required, and the Mac will actually check what's in the portal for the DSCP markings and get it that way.
How come we don't do that with the Windows?
Because you need the admin rights, it's a operating system thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
The API you guys talked about a little while ago, is that like a VM box that you can have all of your, for example, Cisco connect into, and then it goes up to the cloud?
No, it's actually just an application that runs on a Windows server. It runs as a service. It's just an installed application. But all of the business logic, if you like, runs in the Zoom cloud. So nothing connects to it. It connects to your endpoints. That's how that works.
Okay, so I still need a gateway and that kind of stuff as far as getting out with my SIP then?
No, you don't. So typically the endpoints will be able to traverse directly out. So the diagram that John showed correctly, with the firewall correctly configured, it will just use NAT, and it will just go out to the internet and will just work just like a regular PC does. So it's exactly the same process.
Okay. Over last weekend, I set up a connector room, okay, off an SX80. And I set it up, and everything went great, everything was great, until I went up there and hit, push to join. It dialed the number, but then it wouldn't go anywhere. It kept dialing it. I can go in and I could dial it manually, and that was fine, but is there any way of troubleshooting stuff when we have that kind of an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're up on time, but I'd be happy to
Sure.
hook up with you at the end,
Yeah.
and we can drill into that a little bit.
Fantastic.
Thanks, everyone. We
Thank you,
appreciate
Yeah.
your
Keith.
time. Yeah.
Thank you.